welcome everybody to another developer interview here on the Perceptive podcast, courtesy of Game Wisdom. For my chat tonight, we're going to be talking to the head of game development at Kokku, which hopefully I'm going to hopefully not mess that up too badly. But he's here to talk about game design as well as some of the challenges when it comes to mental health, when it comes to being in the game industry. So please welcome to our chat this week, Tamir. How are you doing?
Hi, doing well. It's a pleasure to be here. I think it's a little later than where you are right now, as we're based here in Brazil.
Mm-hmm. Yep, and time zone differences are always like one of the most fun parts of this job for sure.
Yeah. No, I mean, for us as kind of an outsource co-development studio, we're always working with clients from all around the world, and so time zones definitely get pretty wacky. Especially since Brazil no longer changes their time. So that means we'll have regular set meetings with various people around the world that suddenly change, twice a year.
Yeah, fingers crossed we'll finally get off daylight savings over here in the U.S. soon, because it's been driving everyone here a little bit crazy with the hours and switching.
Absolutely.
But it is a pleasure to have you on. Thanks again for reaching out and expressing interest. As I was telling Tamir and for everyone else watching, if you are a developer working on a game or just want to come on and talk game dev, I am always looking for a guest. So message me, reach out, DM, whatever. There's many ways open. So since this is your first time on the cast, Tamir, could you talk a little bit about kind of like who you are and what is your background when it comes to game dev?
Sure. My name is Tamir Nadav. I'm the head of creative here at Kokku Games, which means I oversee both game design and UI UX development and design at the studio. I've been in the industry about 20 years now. I started back in 2004 or 5, depending on what people consider started. I actually started as a programmer, graduating from Full Sail University. And then found my way into game design somewhere around 2010, 2012. I switched to becoming a producer. And then I've had various titles that are either game design or production ever since. It's been quite a wild ride. I've been to 14 companies. I've been through a lot of layoffs. But I've gotten to work at some really great studios like Disney Interactive. I worked at Vigil back in Austin for a while. I worked at Telltale for a couple of years. So I've gotten to see a lot of kind of what makes the industry great.
Mm-hmm. And in that time, have you always like been like in Brazil, or have you been like kind of like traveling around the world when it comes to like being game dev?
So I'm American. I was born in New York, and most of my life and my career was spent in America. I moved to Brazil about 5 years ago. I got a really great opportunity to try something new, and I figured, hey, let's give this adventure a shot. And once I got here to Brazil, I realized, man, this is really an amazing place, and I don't want to leave. So instead of just sort of going where the wind would take me, now I've been sort of like, okay, what can I do to stay here in Brazil? But I've gotten to work with companies from around the world as well, just in terms of various remote contracts and things like that. And it's been really cool to see just all of the stuff that's happening world round.
Mm-hmm. And it's very interesting about Brazil in terms of their kind of like game dev footprint. Because I've been following them for like, I think it's going to be almost like a decade very soon in terms of like keeping track of games from Brazilian developers, the Brazilian Games Festival they have every year. And it has been like very interesting kind of like track how we're seeing more and more games come from the area. So I guess like for you, you said that you moved there about 5 years ago. Like, how has like the Brazilian game dev scene been like for someone actually in the scene?
One of the things I love about the Brazilian game dev scene is the passion. Brazil is an avid consumer of video games. For example, worldwide, it's currently third. It's below China and the United States, and then Brazil in terms of players. For like development revenue, it's much lower. That a lot of that's in fact due to the economy, due to the very high taxation on electronic devices. So there's a pretty high barrier to entry. But almost any given week, there's a game jam happening somewhere. There's somebody working on an indie game somewhere that's trying to get some funding to go to launch on Steam, things like that. So the hunger for creating games is definitely strong in Brazil. and I really love seeing just how much of a gaming community Brazil has. So as the country is growing and as the economy is stabilizing more, as the cost of entry like electronics gets cheaper and cheaper, you'll see even more of this of a global development effort coming from Brazil. Whereas right now it's very indie and a little bit of double A. I think soon enough we're going to start seeing some AAA games coming out of Brazil.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and as you said, like the passion has definitely been there. We've played a lot of games from the space over the years, and it has only been growing. I guess, like for you, like any notable names or games you want to give a shout out to.
Um, there, off the top of my head, there aren't specifics. That's mostly because I wasn't thinking of any before like 10 minutes ago, but I really love. I would say Knights of Pen and Paper is a game that a lot of people may be familiar with on mobile, and that it came from a Brazilian studio. And so they've got a sequel out now. They've got a couple other games as well, and it's just sort of like this really really good quality, but not AAA. But the games are fantastic and they're fun to play and easy to get into, and there's a lot of creativity that comes out of these studios. But it's always fantastic to see that these studios are maybe like 10 people, maybe 20, and Brazil does have the larger studios as well. A lot of that is in sort of the mobile space, or experimentation with things like VR and stuff like that. But there's still a very huge community that is focused on the double A
Mm-hmm.
and indie sort of group. And so when you go to these events like Big, which is the Brazilian Independent Games Festival down in Sao Paulo, which this year is now partnered with Gamescom, and they host the biggest games conventions in the world out in
Mm-hmm.
in Cologne, Germany. There's now a Gamescom South America, which is in Sao Paulo at the same time, and so they've merged together to create sort of this mega conference that's going to be happening here in June. You just get to see all of these indie developers, just rows and rows of people with their computers showing off the cool little games that they've been putting together. And I say little not as in like they don't matter. I say little in terms of like these are small studios, and the games are not AAA sized, but they're definitely at a high quality level, and it's super fun to see.
And it's always fantastic to get kind of, again, like the sheer variety of games from like any particular area. And it only is going to, I think, keep growing as we're seeing more and more studios. And I think just like more and more proof to people that, a general like area region in the world that you can make video games there. Like again, like for a long time people listening, I've had discussions about kind of like how we've had these kinds of like mega centers of game dev, Canada, the West Coast here in the United States, Poland, and so on. But I've had a chance to talk to developers from Africa, from South Korea, and so on. And it is getting more and more, I guess, like accessible and approachable to have game dev almost anywhere in the world. And again, it's a great way to kind of like show off like what makes like your studio, your own personality, like stand out from everyone else.
Yeah, I mean, at this point in time, with the cost of resources being pretty low, if I can get online, if I can play a game, I can make a game. And so, anywhere in the world, you're seeing people downloading these free resources, and they're using them to try and put something together. I've seen people even with just a couple tutorials teaching themselves Unity, teaching themselves Unreal, simply because they had a unique idea, and now they have the means to put it together for free. Aside from the cost of the internet connection and the computer and everything like that. And so anytime I get a chance to see these indie showcases, or participate as a judge or a mentor in a game jam, I'm always just completely blown away by what people are doing with limited resources and time. And
Mm-hmm.
while Brazil is growing rapidly, it's as a massive consumer of games, that makes sense. But it still just amazes me to see these things and from anywhere in the world.
Mm-hmm. Yep, for sure. So to go back to Kokku, what kind of like again like for people listening who may not have heard of Studio, can you talk a little bit about kind of like what does your studio do? What are some like games or some of the projects that you've worked on in the past?
Sure. So Kokku is we're basically called an ex-dev studio. We can do full development based on an idea or IP. We can help, in terms of we've got artists and game designers and programmers to help, facilitate, pushing a project across the finish line or creating DLC or whatever it may be. In some cases, we act as a little bit of a consultant, that sort of thing. We are basically a partner for studios that, well, I don't want to hire 400 people, but I need a lot of stuff done. Let's contract these guys, and they're going to augment our team, and we're going to be able to finish. And then we don't have to worry about now we need to lay people off or anything like that because it's on a contract basis. And so we've had a number of really great partners. We have announced recently that we're doing some work with Paradox. In the past, we've done work on every Horizon video game within the franchise, aside from the VR one. We've done a bunch of artwork and things like that for them. So we've done a lot. Me personally, I joined the studio about a year ago, and so my involvement hasn't been directly on any of those projects. I'm more focused on some other ones that haven't been announced or showcased yet. But for me, I'm less of an active game designer on these projects and more of just making sure that each project has the resources they need to be successful. I also do a lot of work with our business development team in order to secure clients and make sure that we're giving them a really good offer and that people are happy with it, and so that we can get these contracts. And then with those contracts, then my team can go in and do all of the super fun creative stuff that I used to do in my career. But yeah, I also do internal. I do mentoring and trying to help our game design and UI UX designs grow in their careers and be able to be more matching, keeping up with the times. They have good training exercises, things like that.
Mm-hmm. So, with Kokku, like kind of like stepping in to help various studios, I
Mm-hmm.
guess for my audience, it usually features a lot of like indie developers, like smaller teams, stuff like that. Like when your studio gets like called in, or you do get a client to work with them, like again, like obviously you can't go anything that's NDA breaking, but like kind of like what is like the process, or like how does like your studio like come in and like help a studio or help someone else in terms of their games development?
Sure. So most of our clients are actually worldwide. Indie game developers and AA game developers generally have lower resources, and so
Mm-hmm.
it doesn't really make sense to work with a partner, at that, unless there's some sort of a big funding, and they're really looking for like AA or AA plus, and that's when
Mm-hmm.
we'd be able to help. So most of our clients happen to be, come from the United States or come from, or Canada or France or Poland, the countries that you mentioned. Generally, we go to a lot of conventions, and are the people within our business development teams have a lot of these contacts in these various companies around the world, and they just communicate. And so when games start getting announced and things like that, it's like, oh, maybe they need help with this product. Let's talk to them. So it's really about just sort of managing these relationships that we have with people. And at the end of the day, it's sort of the best way to look at clients is, they're not, a game company with X amount of dollars or whatever. They're people. And they're people who want to do something cool. And, we do too. And so as long as we manage this relationship and we start talking, and then, they'll ask us in various ways to show that we could be the ones who can help them complete their product on time and on budget. There's a number of different things we do, and this probably best to keep under NDA. But we work with the clients until they're okay. Yep, you're the ones that we would like to sign with, and then signing a contract, picking the right people within the studio to work on the project, onboarding, all of that, and then depending on the client, sometimes we have direct communication with their game team, and we're basically integrated as part of the development team. Sometimes we're a little bit more we're a little bit more external as an external developer. But all in all, each client has their own way of working, and it's our job to be flexible and to work with them, whatever works for them, and to make everybody happy and to release a great game that we can be proud of.
Mm-hmm. And in terms of like genres, does like your studio focus on any particular genre, or just more like jack of all trades?
I'd say we're more jack of all trades. I mean, it could be anything. We've done Roblox experiences, we've done mobile games, we've done AAA, we've done AA. Um, it's really up to the client, and that I think is one of the things I really love about working here. Is over the course of my career, I haven't gotten to work on very many games that I would actually play. and that's not necessarily a bad thing. It meant I've had to adjust and learn constantly. For example, I was working on NBA 2K. I worked on NBA 2K19. I don't know anything about basketball. And so I just started playing NBA 2K, and I was getting completely demolished until somebody taught me, like, no, no, you're supposed to do this thing called pick and roll. That's the move that everybody does, and then it allows you to, to determine who you pass the ball to and everything. Like, I don't know anything about basketball. But like as I started playing and they were teaching me how to play, I started to get into it, and that allowed me to be a better game designer. Now, at the time, I was a producer, but I was starting to think about the game design of building a basketball game and all of the complexities that go into it that I never would have thought of if I never actually sat down and played in a genre that I generally don't like. So now, that allows me to basically look at any game design that comes in at Kokku and give a generalized, oh, we can do this will help, and I always encourage every single one of my game designers to pick a game in a genre that they dislike and play it for 8 to 10 hours, so that they can also be able to be a lot more of a generalist. I bring things from this basketball game into anything I do now that I wouldn't have had that experience before. Um, basically, to boil it back, we are capable of doing anything. And one of the reasons for that is because we are all getting very, very comfortable with any type of game, and we're able to find the joy in all of these different types of games, and that makes us a really solid pick for for a partner, especially when it comes to game design.
Mhm. And yeah, like being able to like work on like a very wide spectrum of games is always like really good, especially in terms of broadening your own game dev analysis and your skills. Like for me, with a lot of stuff I do with Game Wisdom is I get to, because I base over myself to like any and every indie game. I have played just such a huge variety of them, and it does really help broaden your horizons when it comes to understanding design. How, yes, something may work for an action game, but may not necessarily work for deck building roguelike or a visual novel or anything like that. And I think it's very easy for people to kind of get like stuck in that rut. If they only look at things from like one perspective, it makes it a lot harder to make a game that stands out or is interesting.
Yeah, I completely agree. I really think that versatility is important for a game designer more than any other discipline. I think versatility is very important for game design. For others, I still think it's very important. For art, there's definitely I have a good use case for it. Although a lot of games are looking for very specific types of art, so being able to do one thing really, really well is very important. Engineering can be the same way, but especially for game design, because game design, what motivates you in terms of your work comes from literally anything that has happened in your life.
Mm-hmm.
I very rarely, I don't think I've ever actually met a game designer that is a game designer because their father was a game designer and their father before him was a game designer. Right? Everybody who gets into game design, they have a story. They were doing something before, they were trying something different or whatever, and then he said, what the heck, let me get into game design, let's see how this works, see how it goes. And all of that life experience before and during, on the side, brings itself to being, a really good game designer. I remember, for example, one of my first professional gigs as a game designer, we had another game designer who we were all working on trying to build an economy in a social game,
Mm-hmm.
and we were struggling with, like, it's like for a city, and we were struggling with like taxes and how to balance it and everything. And this one designer, before he joined the company, he used to work in textile imports and exports. And he was like, you know what? Actually, it's this reminds me a lot of what I used to do at work. Hang on, let me take a swing at it. And so he's putting in like the way of of shipping goods and receiving goods and the various costs and taxes and how this balances out and everything. And we ended up with a really cool experience because of that. Like, and it just came from like a random thing that happened, that happened in his life prior to becoming a game design. So when you think about it like that, versatility is basically in the core heart, in the heart of being a game designer. Even if you're only working on one game, you still need to make it, unique and interesting for your players when you work on the sequel and the third and stuff like that. So versatility, I think, is a very, very important trait for all game designers to have.
And having like again like be kind of like a worldly experience like that. Like I've interviewed developers from like all walks of life in terms of their backgrounds. I've talked to like investment bankers who decide one day to go into game dev, people just right out of college, and just everything in between. And like again, like part of like what we talk about, and to bring us back to the Brazilian game dev scene, is just how your life's experience. My phone just rings at like the perfect time there. 1 second. All right. 3, 2, 1. Yep, and to bring us back to the Brazilian game dev scene, like having like this worldly experience really does allow you to translate into all manner of different game designs, different experiences, and it's why the indie space has become such a huge and diverse market over the past 14 years. The fact that we have people who would probably have never had the chance to work at a major studio like a Nintendo or an EA or a Blizzard going, you know what? I'm going to go make my own game. And it's going to be whatever I want it to be. And like over the last like 4 months alone here in 2024, we've seen some like shocking successes. Balatro just kind of blowing up out of nowhere. Hearing more and more from the indie space. Right now, as we're recording this, Ludo Narracon should be beginning, I think, in about like a week or so from as we're recording this. And again, like, it's just like you're never going to find two games that are going to be exactly alike. There's always going to be some kind of difference or X factor there.
I completely agree. Even though I worked in 10 various different game studios in the United States before I came to Brazil, I thought that it's like, okay, yeah, I get it. I understand how game studios work. Um, but what I forgot about, I guess ignorantly, but also understandably, what I wasn't realizing is how much of the game development mentality and the way that that works in the United States is based off of the culture of the people in the United States. So when I went to Brazil, and Brazil has a very different culture, especially around people. People like the way that people interact with each other in Brazil is very different than the United States. I mean, there are some cities here in Brazil I think that are a lot closer, but in general, very very different. And so when you go to work every day, it doesn't feel anything like a game studio in America. It feels like something totally different. I personally really prefer the culture here in Brazil. People are a lot closer. People, you sort of build connections with people a lot quicker. You're not just person sitting in chair four. And I really like it. Now, game dev does have a lot of closeness everywhere, and that's another half-hour discussion I could rant about. But Brazil has this culture about it, the way that people work together, that's very different from the United States, and it easily lends itself into the uniqueness of the products that are being created. It's a lot more like we can do, we've got this, we can do this together, and it's a lot more. What's the right word for this? I'm going to say scrappy, but only the positive aspect of that. People are trying to do really cool things with little resources, and so they're coming up with insanely clever solutions for solving some game dev problems, and it's absolutely inspiring to see. And so my first couple of months at a game studio in Brazil really took me by surprise, and I wasn't sure how to respond to people. Like, how do I be a manager? What how do people work? I didn't know it was going to be so different. But all of that lends itself into the games that come out of Brazilian studios. Is that their version of love that they pour into the games is what comes out, and their unique ideas. They're short usually. It's content light, but a really unique mechanic for people to play around and have fun with, and they're meant to be shared. There's something innate about games that are being built in Brazil that I feel like they're just meant to be shared with people. Like many American games that are worldly games, you download them, you play them by yourself, maybe you talk about them, whatever. But in Brazil, I feel a lot of it feels like I meant to play a game and then share it with somebody else so that they can play it and we can talk about the experience we had and how much fun it was and how interesting it was. And so all of these things come together and sort of, but they, because of this the very very different vibe that exists here in Brazil versus the United States. And I can assume that it's like that also with things like in Canada and France and Poland, because they also have very different cultures. But I'm not sure how much. And the only reason I say that is because South America is a little bit less on the world stage when people think about game development. They'll think about South America for things like external studios, like us, for example, but not somebody out here is going to make something really, really big. And so, these days we're starting to prove that we can, and that's super exciting.
Mm-hmm.
Um, which I'm going to throw something really back. I just remembered another really great game I'd like to highlight
Mm-hmm.
called Opus Castle. They're on chapter 2. I think chapter 3 is coming out soon, I hope. It is a game built by a studio in Sao Paulo that is a 3D exploration kind of puzzle room type of game, but it's basically based on a real story. It's based on a tiny little castle on Opus Street in Sao Paulo that had a tragedy and a big mystery. And so this game is about figuring out what that mystery actually is. It's really interesting, and that's the kind of and it's a 3D game. It looks pretty good. It's just that's the kind of thing like somebody just put a whole bunch of love into this passion product and made something great. The other reason I want to highlight it is because there's no audio in English. If you want to play in English, you need to turn on the subtitles, but you're going to be listening to Portuguese, and I think it's really cool that a game company is doing that. It's generally it's we got to focus on the English market first, and then everybody else comes next. But this is no. These voices need to sound these are people in Brazil that we're talking to. They need to speak in Portuguese, and it's up to people to subtitle them. So
Mm-hmm.
but anyway, yeah, I think that's another really good example of the love and the uniqueness that comes from a Brazilian studio rather than a studio from anywhere else in the world. Like this can only be made in Brazil, type of thing.
Mm-hmm. Yep. And to that point again about being able to, like, as you said, about like having like scrappiness when it comes to a lot of the studios there, like it's always been that challenge for a lot of indie teams in terms of I want to get this, very unique experience, very unique gameplay loop, but I don't have, hundreds of thousands, let alone millions of dollars to invest in, Unreal Engine, to hire an entire, studio of animators and artists to create this. So how do I get that experience? But maybe I use, pixel art. Or maybe I use, stop motion, or just how do I use my own talents to make something interesting? One of my favorites, I'm not sure if they are Brazilian or not, was like the Game Bakers. I always wait. Is it the Game? I did this on the previous cast for people watching. The developers of Blasphemous, who they went from going from the last store, which was just entirely like very like low res pixel art, the Game Kitchen. There, I always have to look that up. To then going to Blasphemous, which was just like a massive step up in terms of that quality. And with a lot of indie teams, we've seen them like have very ingenious ways of going around the fact that they don't have like massive budgets and teams. Again, like to go back to Balacho from a few minutes ago, is a game that, as of this time as we're recording this, I saw there was like this like minor freak out on like Twitter X when the source code got leaked, and everyone was just like having like a fit about how did they make this just like spaghetti code turn into like one of the most popular games of this year. And again, sometimes if it works, it works.
Yeah, the Game Kitchen is a great example. They're based in Spain,
Mm-hmm.
but I love their games.
Yeah.
Like The Last Door terrified me, and I mean those are pixels that are this big,
Yeah.
and they terrified the crap out of me. Um, but yeah, of just like what can I put together? How can I sell an idea? And I think that's one of the things I love about sort of so there's an expression here in Brazil, dar um jeitinho, which basically means to do it in a little way.
Mm-hmm.
That's what it literally means. But it essentially means hack.
Mm-hmm.
To give it a little unique flavor. Like so, it's a hack. And so people have their ways of doing these things, of putting something together, and it works. You don't want to poke the code too long, or it's going to fall apart. But it works really. It works for its purpose, and they sell ideas that way. For people these days who don't have the resources to build the game of their dreams, so much is free these days. Like, there are a number of art tools that are free, game engines are free. Animation, like pixel animators are free, and like scripting engines are free, and so people are able to create the game that they want with nothing, with just investing a little bit of time, and that's really beautiful to me. And so, like, some of my favorite games are coming from a free engine called Adventure Game Studio. There's
Hmm.
a studio called Wadget based in New York,
Yeah.
which you know this because all of their games take place in New York. Um, they that have been using Adventure Game Studio to make critically acclaimed games for decades, and that also was just one person for a while, with a couple others helping out. So, all of that stuff is available, and for the people, like, I meet people here like, oh, I have a really good idea, but I don't know how to program, or, oh, I'm a good artist, but I don't know how to design. I always encourage these people to go to game jams, because sometimes they're just sort of like, you know LFGs, right? Just looking for a group to game jam for 30 hours, and you're going to meet a programmer, an artist, and a designer, and then so people will just slam together 30 hours and create something super interesting, and then many times they go on and basically form an unofficial studio and build a small demo, and sometimes that demo gets interest, and it gets bought, or it gets licensed, or it gets some funding, and then they go from being a not quite a and they go from just being like a quote unquote studio to being a real studio. They quit their day jobs, and then they turn that into a game.
Hmm.
And anyone who is an investor, I highly recommend checking out the Brazilian game dev scene, because you will see more ideas in a month than you can see anywhere else in a year. Um, and like I mentioned earlier, I love watching these things, because just the innovation that's coming out in 30 hours. When I was doing game jams 20 years ago, we could barely do anything. The technology we had was costly, and you had to program everything yourself. So you had to come with, like, basically a pre-existing engine of your own.
Hmm.
And it's like, okay, I've got a spaceship that can fly around. And now it's like, oh, I remade Genshin Impact. Like, what? How did you do that in 30 hours? And so, because the technology is there, and it's really, really fun to watch.
Hmm. I'm happy you mentioned Waja because I've interviewed Dave several times, and
Oh,
he is
I love
a
Dave.
great guy to chat with. And yeah, and like to that point, like a lot of times on our interviews, we talked about kind of like that struggle that can happen early on, especially for a lot of developers. And the scene has, I think, really changed, like hugely over the past decade. That again, like if we're talking like 2008 to maybe 2012, 2013, like the goal of being indie was to simply, make a prototype, get some name, go work at a major studio, and then never make an indie game again. And I've actually
Hmm.
interviewed a few developers who actually had that happen to them. They made a little game, it was okay, then they got a job at a big studio. Now, the goal is if you're going to be an indie developer, you're going to be an indie developer. Like, that's going to be your passion and trade as your studio life. And it has become very more accepting. I think it's become very viable these days. It's still difficult. Again, do not get me wrong for anyone watching this right now. But the days in which you could say that indie was like the stepping stool to then getting like the real game job, that's kind of over.
Yeah, I agree. I think some people still do that. Some
Mm-hmm.
people still do, indie as a stepping stone, because their goal is to do something really big.
Mm-hmm.
Eventually, when you start off, your career, you're generally not the one in charge of, making AAA game decisions. But, there's a lot of people who still do that, and there's absolutely nothing wrong with that. What I see, what happens though, is some of the people who are doing this, people start begging for more of the indie stuff, because, like, hey, whatever you did as an indie, we want more of that. That was super
Yep.
cool. Can you please? No, I can't. I have a full time job. I can't go. Oh, come on, man, this is so cool. Um, and so, and some people get lucky. Some people make an indie game, they do a project on their own, and it gets super super popular. And then they don't really need to do anything else. They just work on that game for a while and retire. That happened to Minecraft. That
Mm-hmm.
kind of happened to Stardew Valley, except he hasn't retired yet. Um, but there's a number of games that same thing with Dave. He's been doing this for quite some time, but he's still going. Um, and but it's really beautiful when this happens. It's important to call out that's not the norm, but it is happening more frequently than it was before, so it can be something to strive for. It's still important to, we go way back here in our conversation, to be versatile, because you may create a really cool indie game and the market just, for whatever reason, isn't going for it. So try something else.
Yeah.
That doesn't mean it's a bad game,
Mhm.
by any means. It just means it's just not what the market currently wants. And the market is a very fickle thing, and sometimes it may want that in 5 years. Sometimes it missed the window by 6 months.
Mm.
So just keep if that's something you love, keep working on those indie games as long as you're able to take care of yourself.
Hmm. I could certainly have a discussion about like the video game market, but I know you have to be going about 20 minutes, and that's like an hour or two of me ranting and
Yeah,
raving for sure. Um,
the market is tough.
yep. So I guess 2 points I want to touch on definitely before we wrap up for tonight. So the first one is talking more about UI UX. This is another topic that I can certainly ramble about until the cows come home. But
Mhm.
with your background, kind of like how you're mentoring the various developers and people at Kokku, what are your thoughts towards like UI UX? Like any like very important things you try to instill in developers? Anything useful you can tell anyone watching this at the moment?
So in my opinion, and I understand that this is contested,
Mhm.
so it's my opinion, it's the opinion of many other people, but there are many people who disagree with me. UX is pretty close to game design. They're not totally different. So like, and UX was born out of game design, basically.
Mhm.
So back when I started out as a game designer, there wasn't really a UX thing. It was just UI artists, and they were listening to game designers. And when I was doing UX, it was in that context, as I was sort of creating that I want the user to do this. This is the information they need to see. This is why, and I was designing UX without even realizing that's what it was. So my advice for UI UX is it's basically it's a game designer and an artist that are smashed together. If you're doing both UI UX, and so really good UI UX people are a little less common because you need to have your hand in both things.
Mhm.
There's technical game designers where you've got a good balance between programming and game design, and then you've got tech artists, which is a combination of programming and art. UX is kind of that combination of game design and art. What I would say to people, I'm really, really happy that it is now its own thing. That you can even specialize and do only UI. You can specialize and do only UX. A lot of times you see it together, but I'm really happy that that's its own thing because having game designers focus on the experience a player has with the world around them, and UX is focused on the actual player's experience with the game as the player's external. So game design is the player's experience internally in the game, and UI and UX is the player's experience sitting in front of the computer or sitting in front of their console.
Mhm.
And they should be working together. But I'm really glad that we're now like dedicating research and time and effort into making both UI and UX better in their own ways. I think that's really important to the to the industry as a whole. And so I've been really, really happy with. I've met some incredible specialists in UI UX, and I've really just loved my experience working with them. I am not an artist. That is the worst thing that I do. I've done literally everything to make a video game, including audio and voice support and programming and production and launching. I've never done anything art related, and that's for everyone else's benefit. I am not an artist. So my work with my team is more about finding them the right resources to helping them grow. They have a lead who is a lot more experienced than I am, and that lead helps them grow. And I'm more of just of a facilitator at that point. But basically, the biggest advice goes back to what I said about game design: is for UI UX, it's really important to have versatility, and to have variety in your experiences. So if you don't like sports games, play sports games, because what they do to UI and UX is very different than any other type of genre. Same thing with playing racing games or fishing games. It's going to be really different.
Yeah.
And you may hate them, but play them and find out why people like them. Play the really high quality ones that everyone loves, find out why they love them. Play the ones that suck and understand the difference. And then
Mhm.
you're going to take that knowledge and put it into anything else that you work on. So I highly encourage. That's just generally game design. Go play something you hate. I
Yep.
feel like I feel like Calvin's dad when I say that, but from the comics that many people who are watching this might not know about, but Calvin Hobbes. But yeah, it's generally like just research something that you don't like because you don't have experience with it. Find out why people like it, and you will be a better whatever it is that you're doing in your career.
Yep. And really good points there, Tamir, about UI UX. It is something that has become more and more important. Something that, like, for me, like, someone who has played so many games, who again, like, I have played games from one-man teams to dozens, if not hundreds. I've seen everything in between. And UI UX is one of those things I think for a lot of people, even like for people who have like years of experience in the industry, they may not really be thinking about with their games. But yet, like for someone like me, like I can load up like almost any game within like 20 seconds of playing. Just like immediately start picking out any issues, any pain points, anything like that. And like for some people watching us right now, they may be thinking, well, who the hell cares? Who cares if the controls don't feel right, or if it's a little annoying to start the game, or maybe there's no volume sliders in the options menu. But
Mm-hmm.
this stuff really does matter when it comes to retention. Because one thing, and this is something that I've been really like hammering on for a lot of developers, is that I check the achievement rates of every game that I play. I check the exact churn rates to see, like, okay, it goes from 100% to 80 to 40 to 10 to, 0.0017% of people who play that game. Because at the end of the day, and like, to like what you were saying earlier about being like scrappy and like always being able to work on your next product or your next project, if even if your game sells really well, but 90% of the people stop playing within like 20 to 30 minutes, how are you going to improve on your next game if you don't understand why they stop playing? And I was saying this on Blues Guy the other day about a lot of people have that mentality that if I like something, then it must be good. If I hate something, it must be bad. That's not
Oh,
how you really want to design a game. And I see this a lot in like the YouTube video essayist space where I really like this game, so these are all the things I, love, love, love. But, this game, something I don't like, then the entire game is horrible. Why is someone going to play this game? It's trash, and, that. But again, you have to be able to study everything about a genre if you want to understand why someone plays it. And yeah, like I have played good, bad, and completely in the middle kinds of games. And if you just play all the really good games, you're not going to see what stops someone from playing. You can, here's another thing I've said before, like anyone can write an essay about why Super Mario is a really good game. Explain to me why someone would play like a 4 out of 10 platformer, or why would someone play a platformer that's not a Nintendo game? And that becomes a lot harder. And with UI UX and approachability and accessibility, again, it's something that we still, I think, still see people having that pushback about. If you're making your game more approachable, you're dumbing it down or you're trying to hurt it. But at the end of the day, if you can get more people to play your game and play it longer, that gives more eyes on that. That gives you a greater chance of having more fans. And if people like game number one, maybe they're going to like game number two from you and game number three. And I've seen developers who unfortunately don't learn those lessons and they release the same game each and every time with the same exact UI UX issues. And yes, there will be people again who they will play that game with warts and all and they will love it, they will declare the best game of all time. But for the vast majority of everyone else, they're just going to move on and not give that game or that studio another look forever.
yeah, I've talked a lot about like I have a Portuguese channel called Gringo Makes Games on Instagram where I talk in Portuguese, talking to the Brazilian developers and
Mm-hmm.
just trying to give little tips and tricks and stuff like that. The first 5 minutes are critical in a game. That's generally how long it takes to to get to like level 5 or 10 or whatever, and to learn the basic mechanics of the game. And even something like you just mentioned specifically about there's no volume slider, because the next time I go to boot up the game, I'm going to think, oh crap, the volume's going to be too loud. I have to turn down my TV. Those are the types of things that make me just not go back to the game. And they're totally like I'm saying this out loud, but these are very subconscious. Like I have games that I want to play, but every time I sit down, I'm like, oh wait, in order to play this game, I have to, boot up my computer and connect it to my TV, and then sometimes the Bluetooth doesn't work, and blah blah blah. And that's he's like, you know what? I'll do it another time. I'll play that game another time. I want to play it, but I'm tired, and there's steps, and I don't want steps. And so like even these little
Mhm.
things make a really big difference in terms of people going back and finishing the game. And
Yeah.
many people, even if they love the first game, if they don't finish it, they're not going to play the sequel because they're going to miss what happened in between. And these tiny little accessible details go a very long way. So,
Yeah.
to the point where at this point, it's 2024. If people say, why should we care about accessibility? Like, if that came up in an interview, I wouldn't hire that person because accessibility is paramount. The
Hmm.
audience for gaming is too big. We have
Yep.
to think about accessibility. It's the only way to make sure that we get enough people to make these products viable. And so if
Yep.
anyone starts saying like, "Oh, I don't understand why it's a big deal or whatever," then they're even in the AAA space, they're gonna drastically fail that part of the interview. And so
Yep.
we need to be thinking about accessibility always, and that's where the UI UX aspect is critical to a successful game.
Yeah. Yep. Understanding accessibility and approachability are very important. And yeah, like as we were saying, when a game feels like work, when it feels like I have to jump through hoops just to get to like the baseline experience, a lot of people don't want to do that. They don't want to have to spend, if they have like an hour or two to like unwind, they don't want to spend 30, 40 minutes of, prep and setup to make sure that this game is working. And, again, like I get to be really old here. Again, like the bad old days when there was no like automatic patching for a game, so you had to go and find the right patch. And oh no, the download mirror doesn't work. Let me go somewhere else. Oh wait, it's the wrong version. Let me go do something like that. Again, people don't want that, and that is very acceptable. And like we've said, being able to just sit down and enjoy a game, that's how you can really grow as a developer. And it's why, like, one final tangent before we get to like the final question I have for you for tonight, that I see so much amazing things out of like first time and kind of student developers because they grew up playing these games. They grew up playing the good, the bad, the indifferent. They know what they want and they know what they don't want. So they're going to put that into a game. And I have
Yeah.
seen like amazing UI UX from like first or second time developers. And I've seen horrible UI UX from teams that have had maybe 20, 30 years plus of individual game dev experience. And they may be
Yep.
making the same exact genre that they worked on at like a AAA or AA studio, and it still doesn't work right. It doesn't feel good. And again, like it's one of those things. Like I've said this before, like it's you either get it or you don't. And for a lot of people who don't get it, they again think, well, who cares? But when you look at a game and you see it go from 100% people playing it to 20% within 10 minutes, you have to care about that if you expect to keep your studio going.
Yeah, I completely agree.
Yeah. So this has been a great conversation. I know you have to go in about 10 minutes. I could sit here and chat with you all day for sure. And if you're free in the future to me, I would love to have you back on because there's certainly a lot more we can talk about.
Oh, wonderful.
So my final question, and this was something that we were talking about at the very beginning, is about kind of like the mental health of game development. As you said, you've been in the game dev space for a very long time. You've had a chance to work at major studios. You worked with small, medium, large teams, and all that. And mental health and kind of like again like the grind of game dev is one of those topics that you either hear everything about it or you hear nothing about it. So I want to give you like a few minutes or give you like a chance to kind of talk about like your own thoughts on mental health and kind of like what it means when it comes to again working on a game project that could be maybe 6 to 9 months, it could be 2 to 4 years, it could even be 8 to 10 years of your life.
Sure. So, where to start? The thing with game development is it is primarily built on passion. People make games not because they just need a job and money. Because if you want money, games are not the right career for you. Unless you're investing. But it's all about passion, which means it is easily exploitable. And I won't say that like every CEO is a nightmare, or that the purpose of every company is to take advantage of all their employees, because I don't think they are, especially not at first. But there are moment to moment decisions and changes and policies that happen throughout a company's growth to revenue and shareholders and all of that things that begins to have a burden on all of the employees. And it may not happen every day, but it's going to be there. Any industry that has passion as its core tenant, um, which generally happens to be creative industry, so music, film, all of these things have the same. That's why the writers were striking, and the screen actors were striking. Is about this, because they were being exploited, and it's the same in the game development space. I've been in the industry about 20 years now. It could be longer depending on when you consider what is an indie game, things like that. But I have had 14 different jobs, and that wasn't my choice. It was because I've been laid off 9 times. And so even now, being in upper management at the studio I'm at now, I absolutely have PTSD. I absolutely have trauma, to the point where if I see my manager put a meeting on my calendar for Friday and I don't know what it is and it's just me and him, I probably can't sleep the night before, and I start working on my because I'm already terrified that, oh, here it is, here's the time, this is the time. Like, things are going great, but this is what's going to happen, and so I can't sleep the night before. And then it's just like, hey, did you get a chance to review this? I think your work is doing really well. Your teams are doing excellent. Blah blah blah. And I'm like, oh, great, yay, thanks. But like, I've been freaking out for 30 hours.
Yeah.
And that's nothing my manager can do about it. Like, what is he going to do? Like, he needs to schedule a meeting, and he just put it on my calendar, and that's that. But like, for me, it's super traumatic. And so like with my team, whenever I schedule, like, hey, can we have a meeting tomorrow to talk about this, whatever. I know it's Friday, but don't worry, we're just talking about Roblox or whatever. And it's like, oh, okay, And I've had people say, thank you for telling me what the meeting's about, so I don't panic. Now, it means if I do ever have to be in a situation where I do have to deliver some bad news, I need to do it very quickly and not create a meeting 24 hours in advance. But it's really hard. I happen to be neurodivergent. That's not uncommon in the gaming space, and I think that in and of itself is a very interesting thing to see, because as a gamer, many neurodivergent people went to play video games as a way of sort of finding a comforting space for them to be in. That's not dealing with the difficulties of interacting with people, or or reality, or like anything that happens. I think a lot of neurodivergent people have gone to video games. Interesting statistic: there are a lot more left-handed people in video games than there are in many other industries. I'm a lefty, so there you go. And so neurodivergent people went to games. And then, when people started, hey, I want to make video games, then obviously there are a lot more neurodivergent people who are in the gaming spaces. And so I think we are at the point where we're recognizing that gaming has a large population of neurodivergent people. But there's so much more that we should be doing to make it easier for neurodivergent people to be successful at work. There's a lot of various different work cultures that we can implement, a lot of just talking to people and giving people safe spaces to talk about what's going on, and listen to your employees. I think is like a number one thing that companies could be better at, is just listening to the employees who are saying, look, I'm really unhappy about X, Y, and Z. But it is a huge problem, and it's ever present. Game developers, no matter, like, some have been at the same company for 20 years, pretty rare, but super cool. And they're generally not worried about things like this. But many of us have not. And so it's important to remember that, like me, I feel like, oh, I forgot the name of the sword, like the sword of Damascus is over my head at all times. Not because I'm doing anything wrong, not because the company's having problems, just because that's what has been in the places I've been. And many game developers are feeling that way, constantly seeing their friends getting laid off. Whenever they're laid off, they're trying to find a new job. It's super stressful. They're running out of money. They're moving back in with their parents to get money again. It is a brutal situation, and it affects people permanently. And so we need to just have a better job of understanding how the actions of the game companies are affecting our employees, not just our revenue, not
Mm-hmm.
just our shareholders, but like what are we doing to our own people? You know, it's anyone, not even just a specialist, but none of us are truly replaceable because we're all unique. And if we've got a good thing going, we need to take care of our people and keep them happy. So I could go on for another 2 hours because I think mental health is critically important in terms of how we handle it within a studio and how we handle it in terms of ourselves to work better with studios and just that relationship. But ultimately, like I really think that people just need to get together more and form like I would love for there to be unions, but like even if we can't get a union yet, just form a group of people that you can talk to within your company or within a few companies to share your feelings and to be heard and to be respected. And that alone will help ease some of the burden of being a game developer every day.
Mm-hmm. And like one of the big things, as you said about like so many layoffs and studios shuttering that we've seen in the last like 6 7 months, there have been
Uh,
more and more cries for having like an official game dev union, and it is certainly that I am 100% for. Because again, like as you said, like a lot of people who get in this industry, they get into it for that passion. As you said at the very beginning, like we're not at the point yet where my granddaddy worked on a video game, so now I'm in the family game dev business. Maybe in like another like 2 or 3 generations that would be the
right.
case, but for right now, it is an industry that is driven by passion, and yeah, it's something that I tell a lot of the students when I give talks about game dev, that that passion can be used against you in a lot of ways. And there have been so
Absolutely.
many horror stories over the past 20 plus years about this stuff. And it is something that the industry is going to have to kind of have this reckoning about, especially again with what we've seen over like the last like 6 7 months. Like people were saying like the first like 3 months of 2024 we had like more layoffs. I think like the entirety of like 2023 with the whole like Embracer Group issue. And the problem is that it's like no fault of these studios. Like they didn't do anything wrong. They didn't like screw up or release a bad game. Just when like a manager decides, well, you know what? I don't like so and so, slash that entire studio.
Hmm.
What recourse do you have at that point? And I do hope that we are going to start seeing like a lot more. Like we've had cases of more unions popping up, at least here in the United States, or like the past I think like 2 years. But it's still like not enough, I think, for like a all encompassing one like SAG-AFTRA.
Yeah, so SAG-AFTRA was started when the film industry was really in its infancy, and
Mm-hmm.
that helped it a lot.
Yep.
The games industry sort of exploded with no rules.
Yep.
And so forming a union now is a heck of a lot more tricky than SAG. I mean, they got, I don't remember the percentage, but it was a larger percentage of everyone in film at the time to agree to join. We can't get 10% of every game developer worldwide to sign into a union. It's like the amount of work to coordinate something like that would be dramatic, and nobody is an independent, billionaire who wants
Mm-hmm.
to fund that.
Yep.
And like as much as I say I would love to be, if somebody handed me $100 billion, I don't know if I would have the mental energy to handle something like, because that is extreme. Maybe I'll pay somebody else to do it. Here's money, go make a game dev union,
Mm-hmm.
in order to kick it off. So, um, but I would love to see a union. But even in below that, getting people to just get together and to talk, I think is really good. And so that's happening a lot. And so now it's just they're getting enough people to start yelling vertically and to say, hey, all of us are in agreement on this. We're not an official union, but like, we're still a voice, and to
Mm-hmm.
getting people to start making change. And so I think as those groups start to grow and then they start to get, a little bit of funding from something or whatever, you'll start having the larger unions form. So like we're starting to see the shorter unions form, although some companies are going to extreme lengths to get rid of them.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and some in some cases it's almost painfully obvious that's what happened, but like, so there's still, it's happening, the fight is happening, it's slower than any dev wants, but it's faster than any CEO wants.
Mm-hmm.
And so I'm rooting for those efforts to continue to push forward. And Brazil has completely different laws on unions and stuff like that. We're actually pretty pro union, to the point where if a union organizes a strike in Brazil, if they convince a government body that the strike is valid, like there's a good reason for it, all employees continue to get paid, which is something that's not true in the United States. If you go on strike in the US, you go without salary,
Yep.
which is a very interesting way of controlling strikes. So, whereas in Brazil, if you go on strike, you still get your salary because as part of your job is to make conditions better. So, and so our Labor Day is tomorrow, actually. So, I'm a big fan of like, man, these guys really, this is great. The Brazilian system isn't perfect, but like this is definitely an aspect of it that I really love. Brazil is a lot more friendlier to employees than it is to employers compared to places like the United States and even Canada.
Yep. And like speaking about things moving very slowly, I could talk about like my thoughts on game preservation as well. But again, we'll be here another 4 or 5 hours for sure.
Yeah, that's next time. That's I'm really passionate about game preservation too.
Yeah,
So
me as
that's
well.
part two.
So before I let you go, Tamir, do you have any final thoughts? Anything you want to say about Kokku, UI, UX, mental health? Just like anything to take us out on.
Sure. Just on mental health, if you're watching this, take care of yourself. There's a lot we can't do just due to the way the games industry is working, and that is, in my opinion, like borderline a crime. But there are some things we can. If you can, take a break at lunch, walk away from your desk, get out of the studio if you can. Find a way to disconnect for an hour. You will come back and you will be happier. I take a nap because I work from home and I'm old. And man, I just discovered naps and they're amazing. If you can do that, take a nap. It is wonderful. Find ways to remind yourself that your work is not your life. I love being a game developer. I love creating games. I love helping my colleagues achieve greatness because I'm their manager now and I'm helping them grow. But I can't do it like I did before, and that's a good thing. I end my day and I sign out. I stop checking email. I really urge you to do the same. Don't let a company push you too far, because all it will do is ruin your passion for gaming. It may even ruin your passion for games in general, and it's not worth it. I say if you can, because I know a number of people are in situations like, well, I need a job, I can't find a new one, the market sucks. I totally get that. So do what you can to protect your mental health. Take breaks, log out at the end of the day, take a nap, go away on a weekend if you can, even if it's inexpensive. Take care of yourself, because no one else, like no one in the studio, is their prime responsibility is to take care of you. You need to do this and be protective of your mental health, because it's critical. You're going to be a better game developer if you have better, if you're able to rest and come back refreshed and things like that. But I promise you this is important, and I promise you that you are worth it. So please make time to take care of yourself.
Mm-hmm. Yep. That is a great point to take us out with. So, in terms of social media, any you would like to plug? Twitter, X, Blue, Facebook, whatever, feel free.
Oh, my. So, yeah, I'm on Facebook as Aquaju. I forgot what my Instagram is. I think it's a wise man once.
Mm-hmm.
It's because that's what my father used to always say. A wise man once said, blah blah blah. So, and LinkedIn, I'm Aquaju as well. I highly encourage anyone to connect with me on LinkedIn. I'm happy to talk. I'm happy to listen. I'm also happy to help, get you connected with people or whatever I can do to help you out with your career.
All right, sounds good. I'll include links to everything you like down below. So, Tamir, again, it has been an absolute pleasure chatting with you today, and if you have time in the future, I would certainly like to chat with you some more. Again, we can probably spend an easy hour just on game preservation as a topic in of itself. So,
absolutely.
So with that said, everyone, we're going to wrap things up for today's episode. As I said at the start, if you are a developer working on an upcoming game, or just want to chat game dev, I am always looking for guests, so feel free to mention or feel free to reach out and chat any which way. Do the YouTubing stuff, check out all the books I have on design, all the videos, all that great stuff. And Tamir, again, thank you so much for coming on. I hope you have a great rest of your day and that we can chat again real soon.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure.
So for you folks watching, come back for daily discussions on game design here and on Game Wisdom, where you examine the art and science of games.